This is the lecture on energy efficiency and renewable energy for Chapter 16 in Miller. All right, first and foremost, we have 4 different sectors of energy: industry, residential, commercial, and transportation. Obviously, that means industry is like making things, residential is like homes, commercial is like businesses, and then transportation is automobiles. A lot of times we're going to group our residential and commercial into one category. So we are talking about energy efficiency here. So that is the useful work per the energy utilized. So if we have a higher energy efficiency, then we are going to waste less energy to do the same amount of work. To put that in perspective for you guys, 84% of the energy in the United States is not utilized efficiently, so it is wasted. 41% is lost as heat, and 43% is lost because we have very inefficient machinery. So examples of that are the internal combustion engine, or what you drive, the car, or light bulbs over here. So these things called incandescent light bulbs are very, very inefficient. They lose about 90% of the energy they utilized as heat. So if you look down here, 80% of the energy in cars, engines are lost as heat. Nuclear power plants lose 82%, and then a coal power plant is going to lose 78% as heat. So when we increase energy efficiency, we can also decrease the price of the price that we pay as the consumer of energy. So here is a beautiful graph. So our energy inputs are over here. Notice how we have 85% of non-renewable resources, and remember that non-renewable resources are super cheap, and they typically have a pretty high net energy yield, especially in comparison to our renewable energy resources. Then it's going to be put into the United States economy, and then our outputs are over here. So 43% is that waste heat from the second law of, 41% is that waste heat from the second law of thermodynamics. 43% is that heat that we could probably avoid by increasing our technology, and then 7% is through a petrochemical. So remember that our petrochemicals are those oil-based chemicals like fertilizers or plastics that we use every day, and then 9% actually does something for us. Here's a great infographic about what petrochemicals are. So we have different types of petrochemicals all around here, and they make all of our different products. So you'll have a computer monitor, some photo paper, plastic bottles, plastic bags, Legos. You think of it, name it. If it's made of plastic, you think it might be made of oil, it probably is. It is a petrochemical. So how can we improve energy efficiency? Well, first and foremost, you can utilize those 4 R's that we talked about in sustainability. But as a nation, we can utilize a lot of different other things. So one of those things is cogeneration. So when we burn coal or burn natural gas, we can capture that waste heat and use it for something else, like heating a building or heating water. And this is going to increase your energy efficiency of a power plant from whatever we said before, maybe 20% to about 90%, and this can be called a CHP system. We can also personally increase the efficiency of our homes from converting our incandescent light bulbs to CFL or LED lights. So we have our CFL, those are our swirly lights that you put in your house, or LED lights over here. LED are going to be our most efficient light bulbs because they do reduce our waste heat to 15%, which is really awesome. And they also save you a lot of money when you put them in your homes. Other ways that we can improve efficiency is by building design. So if you are thinking about becoming an engineer, which one of my friends is an engineer, she just became certified in LEED, or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. A building can apply for a LEED certificate, which means that they are basically energy efficient, so they can face their building a certain direction. In the northern hemisphere, we want to face our buildings towards the south because that's where the equator is. That's where most of the solar radiation is coming from, and that is going to decrease the costs of heating by about 20% depending on the building. We can utilize solar hot water heaters or natural gas or tankless hot water heaters, which are super efficient because they're only heating water when they need to. You notice at home, a lot of your appliances are probably Energy Star, which means they use a reduced amount of energy to do their tasks. We can increase insulation and then put living roofs. So this is an example of a living roof over here. You'll notice that there's like a nice garden, but we can also increase agricultural space by putting living roofs or urban gardens on top of roofs, which is pretty cool. Another idea is putting light colored roofs to reflect that solar radiation instead of absorb. There is this idea of vampire energy. So if you have a TV or a computer or any type of electronic, take it off of standby mode because it actually is still absorbing energy when it's plugged in, which is kind of crazy to think about because when you put it into standby mode, you're like, oh, I'm fine, I'm turning it off, but you're not. It's still taking in energy and you are still paying for it. So if you reduce the consumption of vampire energy, then you're going to actually reduce your power bills as well. And then we want to increase our use of renewable energy resources like solar energy, and subsidize those more instead of subsidizing our oil and gas industries. Alrighty, so let's talk about those renewable energy resources real quick. So first of all, we have this solar energy. We have two different types, passive and active. Passive means that we are going to just collect the heat from the sun in order to do some sort of work. And then active is actually putting it through some sort of system in order to convert the heat energy or the photons from the sun. So one of the ways that we have learned to utilize that passive solar system is to face our houses towards the south to collect the heat from the sun, or to use those those solar water heaters on top of our roofs. An active way to utilize solar energy is through these solar thermal systems or CSP systems, which is where we are going to collect the solar energy, boil water, create steam, and turn a turbine. That's just the general creation of energy. And then we can connect these to a smart grid so that we're only using energy when we need to, and then storing it otherwise. Another type of CSP are these solar towers right here. So this is a tower, and then we have a huge array of mirrors around it. So these mirrors can be controlled by a computer, and they can move on their axis in order to basically concentrate and shine the most sun at this solar tower right here. So inside of the solar tower, molten salt is moving through it up and down the tower, and molten salt has a huge heat capacity, so it can store heat for a very long period of time. So that molten salt moves through here, and then it can be stored in a tank for I think about 16 hours. Yep, here it is, 10 to 16 hours, and then the heat can be utilized to turn your turbine when you need it, so it can be hooked up to that smart grid again. Now, the problem with this is that it does use a lot of land, and you do need water to cool the system. And unfortunately, it does have a low net energy yield, but it is utilized quite often in desert areas where you may not have a lot of urbanization, but then you do need that water, so you're tapping into a ground water source that's not there already. All right, our second type of active solar energy are PV cells or photovoltaic cells. These are things that you may have on top of your house, which are going to convert those photons into electrical energy by creating a movement of your electrons through some sort of conductor, which makes a current. when you put these things together, you're going to make a module and then an array when you have a bunch of them together. So you might have some sort of solar farm like this, or some sort of solar array. And these things can make up the giant power plants, which are awesome. But again, they do use a lot of land, which can reduce the amount of habitats or natural areas for different organisms. The countries that most utilize solar power plants are China, Germany, Spain, and the southwestern United States. Remember that these are very location dependent. So if you have more solar radiation, you will be able to utilize these more often. And these are the fastest growing renewable resources, and the cost of them has dropped incredibly. So it's really great. So remember that in the generation of solar electricity, there is no CO2 emitted. However, you do need to utilize CO2 to create your PV cells. That is just the burden that we're going to have to carry with these things. All right, hydropower. Hydropower is an indirect form of solar energy because we rely on the sun to produce or to fuel our water cycle. So hydropower is going to rely on the kinetic energy of water. It's going to move through that turbine to convert that kinetic energy into mechanical energy into electric energy. When you have your hydroelectric power plant, it more often than not requires the building of a dam, which is very unfortunate because dams have a huge environmental implication. They increase sedimentation, they increase flooding, they decrease the ability for fish to migrate upstream, so they decrease biodiversity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. We have used this throughout the history of humans, and they do account for a huge amount of renewable energy across the world. China, Canada, Brazil, and the United States are the top consumers, and if we have a river in the United States that can be dammed and will produce energy, we have dammed it. It's just the way it is. So here is a map of the United States and all of our dams. Notice how we have a lot of red or high hazard dams in the eastern United States, and there are a ton of them in the western United States as well, and then we have more lower to significant hazards in the Midwest. One of the most unfortunate stories of damming a river in the United States is the Colorado River Basin. It has 14 dams on it, including the major dams, and then on top of that, there are many diversions for irrigation. So this area in the United States is a desert area, but we have tried to make it into a nice fertile area. So Las Vegas has green grass, even though it should be a desert. And then it does provide water for 30 million people, and it does provide water for about 15% of our agriculture. So the impacts that it's had on the natural ecosystem is that it's actually increased the amount of drought that we have because this system has become used to us creating an unnatural flow of water. Some parts of the rivers that were naturally clear are now naturally cloudy or unnaturally cloudy. There's a reduced amount of sediments or nutrients because we are diverting from the floodplains. There's an increased amount of salinity at the lower parts of the river, so as you go downstream, there's more salt down here than there is up here, which has led to certain legislation in this area, and then we're going to increase the number of endangered species and also increase the number of non-native species because those non-native species love change and they can come in and adapt real fast. So this is a huge change as far as why we should not be utilizing this as much as we do. Wind power is also called aeolic energy. It is another indirect form of solar energy. So we are creating these convection cells so that warm air or the solar radiation is going to heat up a surface. That air is going to rise and then sink and then rise and sink, creating that convection current. We have a huge potential in the United States for the creation of wind energy, but we have not harnessed that potential yet. And then we do have two different types of wind turbines. The first is this nice stationary turbine over here that you may have seen more often than not. These are for predictable wind currents. And then we have our vertical axis turbines over here, which can basically take a wind from any direction, and they are more suitable for on top of buildings or homes. And these are more suitable for our wind farms. So the pros and cons of wind energy is that it does have one of the highest net energy yields from any renewable energy resource. Wind is inexhaustible. We'll always have wind. And then we don't have CO2 from the generation of energy. Again, we do have CO2 from the production of turbines. We have to use limestone in the base of these turbines to create that concrete base. So we need to utilize CO2 in order to produce those. We can use agricultural fields for our wind farms, or we can use develop offshore wind farms, which can kind of act as biological hotspots. So oysters or some sort of shelled organisms can latch onto these things. And if you've been fishing before, you know that organisms like to hang out around things that are a little bit higher up, so these things can act as biological hotspots. Some cons to wind energy is that we might have some land disturbance from installation. It's not always reliable. Some people think that these things are ugly and then they're noisy. Another awesome thing about these is if they are put into agricultural fields, some farmers can receive about $3,000 to $10,000 per year in royalties from the government per turbine, which is great for our farmers. Two different forms of biomass. One is solid and one is liquid. Solid biomass is the most common utilized form of energy in any nation. Oops, forgot to finish my sentence here. This should say for heating and cooking. It is another indirect form of solar energy because we need the sun to grow plants. So some examples are wood, compost, and animal waste. And then we have some other sources over here like sewage. You can put your poop in and burn it, or trash in and burn it, and that's fine. And it is considered to be something called carbon neutral. So the plants are going to use CO2 to grow, but also release CO2 when burned, or the process of combustion releases CO2. The unfortunate thing with biomass is that it can contribute to deforestation. So if we are using wood for biomass and cutting down those trees, then we can contribute to deforestation, which has been a huge problem in places like Haiti and Brazil. And then if we're removing those trees, then we are increasing soil erosion and then increasing water pollution, which can be a major problem. The good thing about it is that if we utilize biomass in cogeneration systems, then we can increase the net energy yield of biomass because it is relatively low. Liquid biomass, on the other hand, is something like ethanol or a biodiesel. So in ethanol, your sugars from the plants are going to be converted into ethyl alcohols, and then in biodiesel, you're going to have some sort of oil from a plant product. The United States loves ethanol, especially corn-based ethanol. We are the number one consumer of corn-based ethanol, and in fact, most cornfields are not making corn for consumption. They are making corn for ethanol specifically, or for that sugary substance called sucrose. So we have a huge reliance on ethanol in the United States. Now the problem with that is that if we are using all of that land for ethanol or for fuel, then we are also reducing the amount of land to feed a very fast growing population. However, on the other hand, we are reducing our reliance on foreign imports of oil. It does have that carbon neutral thing again, and then we're worried about biodiversity. Another issue is using water for irrigation. In the Midwest, we have something called fossil water. So there are large aquifers that have been there for very, very long periods of time. And if we use up all that water, they probably will never come back again. And we can lead to something called land subsidence. Some common plants for ethanol include sugarcane, corn, switchgrass, and bagasse. bagasse is mostly used in Brazil, and that's just sugarcane pulp. And then for biodiesel, we're using soybean, sunflower, and then restaurant oils like what you would find in the fryer. Geothermal is going to be heat stored within the earth. We have two different ways to harness this energy. One is the geothermal heat pump, which you could get installed on your house tomorrow. This is going to be a horizontal pipe system where you're going to pump your cold air down in the winter, and it's going to heat up your home, or you're going to pump the warm air down in the summer, which is going to become cold and cool your home. So it's great because it doesn't produce any air pollutants or CO2, and it's very, very efficient. The other side of this is your geothermal power plant, which is going to tap into a hydrothermal or hot water reservoir, and you're going to either use dry steam, wet steam, or hot water to generate your electricity, turn your turbine, generator, go to your power grid. We are, in the United States, the main producer of geothermal energy, but Iceland receives most of its energy from geothermal power plants. Last but not least, we have the nuclear fusion of hydrogen atoms. We have our beautiful equation right here, and it looks very foolproof and it looks awesome, but there are many issues because this isn't easy. A lot of the hydrogen gas that we get right now is from either natural gas, coal, or gasoline, which is going to have the same environmental effects as just burning them for energy. And it could actually be worse because now we're burning them, or we're stripping the hydrogen atoms from them, and then we could be producing even more CO2 in the end because now we're using that energy to mine the coal and drill for the natural gas or drill for the oil, and then we're also using energy to strip the atoms from the CH4 or whatever. So hydrogen fuel cells are really, really expensive. So right now the technology is not feasible for the normal human, the normal consumer. But here's how a fuel cell works over here. So we're going to put that hydrogen gas in. The electrons are going to be split from the protons. So the electrons are going to run through this wire right here. The proton is going to move through something called an anode and an electrolyte. And the cathode, it's going to combine with our oxygen, and then it's going to create water vapor in the end. So the nice thing is that we are creating clean water as our byproduct to hydrogen energy. So this is a nuclear fusion process, whereas the creation of energy from uranium is nuclear fission, which is the splitting of the atoms.